rush of blood to her head. Before letting herself out, she threw a loving glance at the incubator. Sometimes she wondered if she was capable of forgetting what preciousness lay inside, or whether that knowledge stood like a pillar in her mind, with every other thought swerving around it just to get by. The hallway was still empty, but she heard the low rumble of Dr. Gavin Erickson's voice in the office next to hers. It was a comforting sound, the reminder of an ally. She paused at his door and knocked. "Arianna?" he called. She opened his door a crack and peered inside, seeing he was on the phone. Gavin and his wife Emily, who together constituted the rest of the clinic's staff, were among her closest friends, dating to medical school a decade back. "Everything okay?" he mouthed, one hand cupping the phone. She smiled and nodded. "Good to go," she whispered, and pulled the door closed. Inside her own office, she sat down at her desk, straining to hear any sounds from the clinic's front door. Nothing. She turned to her computer and pressed her index finger to the middle of the screen. After 2 seconds, the screen lit up and unlocked. A floating message in a box read, "Welcome, Arianna. November 1st, 2027, 7:57 a.m. It was impossible to concentrate on real work, and Arianna knew better than to try. She wondered who the man would be this month, but there was no way to know ahead of time. She looked up at her wall, which was covered with pictures of newborns swathed in blue and pink, next to a bulletin board of cards from grateful parents. In the middle of all the pictures hung a flat screen that streamed live video of the entrance to her clinic. Now it showed an empty sidewalk, occasionally a passerby, and a tree-lined street littered with yellow leaves. For a few tense minutes, she watched. And then, just as she turned back to her computer, she heard it. The creak of the front door. She felt her body stiffen. Neon red light burst from the screen on the wall, followed by an ear-splitting whistle. She swiveled fast to face the screen. Between flashes of red, she could make out a man in a suit. Shielding her eyes, she grabbed a remote from her desk drawer. As she clicked off the alarm, the high-pitched whistle faded, leaving a ringing in her ears. She stared at the screen, which preserved a snapshot of the intruder. This one was a stout, older man with a raised knee, captured the moment he entered the clinic's waiting room. He wore a black suit and a stern expression, also a gun at his waist. Arianna's stomach clenched as she recognized him. He was the most senior inspector at the New York Department of Embryo Preservation. Even though each month it happened the same way, the creak, the alarm, the snapshot, Arianna still felt jolted. She felt even worse for patients who happened to be in the waiting room when a man with a gun swaggered in. But DEP inspectors, as Arianna would explain, had magnetic passes that let them swipe into any fertility clinic whenever they wanted, which set the alarm off every time. With a sigh, Arianna walked to the waiting room to greet the man. He was standing in the center of the room, looking starkly out of place next to the bright yellow couches and baby talk magazines. His gaze steadied on Arianna, revealing no emotion as she stepped forward to shake his hand. Pinned to the lapel of his suit was a thin gold cross. She forced a cheerful smile. "Good morning, Inspector Banks." He shook her hand firmly, saying nothing. The man was a professional judger, she thought, too shrewd to show his contempt. So they had one thing in common. "Follow me," she said, turning on her heel back to the hallway. In the narrow corridor, they walked uncomfortably close to each other. His breathing was slightly strained, as if the bulk of his extra weight sat on his lungs. She slowed down so as not to outpace him, keeping her arms crossed over her chest. They passed the 5 examining rooms that made up her modest clinic, along with the 3 offices that belonged to her, Dr. Erickson, and Emily, the clinic's embryologist and nurse. At the end of the hallway, they stopped at the locked white door. Banks still hadn't said a word.